Hello, hello. We have another list, another very out of date list, but one that I still feel like making. There was a lot of albums I ended up liking quite a lot last year, but not as much as most years. Definitely another pretty weird media consumption year. As I was talking about with anime, I would have guessed that if someone told me, oh, you're going to be inside most of the time, you're not going to really socialize very much, I would have assumed that I would listen to a lot more music. But it didn't actually play out that way. I think just because a lot of my typical avenues for listening to music, like on long bus rides, um, if I'm like staying somewhere and I just want to kind of chill out or something, because I'm just home all the time, there's not many opportunities where I'm like, like just listening to an album is the thing I want to do right now. And I even had kind of like a blitz near the end of the year where I tried to kind of like catch up on some notable releases, but I don't know, it's not something you can force. I think with albums especially, it's something that really needs to have an opportunity to like sink into your lifestyle, to really become special to you. So these are 10 albums that certainly were special to me in one way or another. Starting off with this beautiful kaleidoscopic bokeh-esque image. This is the cover of Fortet's 16 Oceans. I figured it was about time to get back into a Fortet album. I think he's actually been making this music that's this good the entire time, but I typically don't listen to his new releases. He does put out quite a lot of music, but something about this one just kind of captured me. Maybe it was the album cover, and I'm really glad I did. I think it was just what I was looking for at this moment. Clean and bright, complex rhythms scattered through just these wonderfully lush, organic sounding synths. A feeling of progression without urgency draws you around along these rhythmic explorations. That it feels like you're really taking the time to indulge in just how intricate and interesting all of these beats are, without it pushing you, without a sense of um, like breakcore is the exact antithesis to this. The track to track progression also is just hypnotically smooth. It's hard not to just immerse yourself into the entire album once you dip in a toe. And then in this context, even the really spicy little moments of abrasiveness, which he does sprinkle throughout the album, have a very approachable context that you feel well introduced to them, very ready for them. It's not something where you're jarred, where the abrasiveness, the point of it is to be adversarial, but just again to really to highlight your sensing of the entire album and the warmth that comes through all of this. It's like a fractal hug. I'm not really sure what I mean by that, but hopefully that's a vivid image in your mind. Being hugged in an infinitely minute and self-replicating direction. Things like nature samples, small little piano clips, and near the end, a beautiful recording of, I think, his mother, teaching him Sanskrit. The track title is called Mama Teaches Sanskrit, so I kind of assume that's what it is. There's a really beautiful innermost heart to everything you're hearing. My recommended tracks are School, which is just like a very bright, very multifaceted, little microcosm of everything going on in the album, and Something in the Sadness, which is a little more dramatic, has like a bit more of a sad vibe to it, perhaps, as indicated in the title. There's something really compelling, really unique as well. Okay, now on to something completely different. RMR's Drug Dealing is a Lost Art. Good album cover. In the very classic tradition of hip-hop album covers where you censor people's faces. And a family photograph. Wow. Has it really happened? In the year of our Lord 2021, have I unlocked the final genre? And now I can appreciate country? Nah, just kidding. I always liked some country music. I like, some old Johnny Cash classics. The Hurt cover, the Ring of Fire. I like, what's her face? Gillian Welch, who did Time, The Revelator. That entire album it just floors me. A lot of other stuff could be considered country that I like. Anyways, but this though is the country album that I think I have been most addicted to ever. Rascal, of course, his big breakout single, an adaptation of a Rascal Flatts song, so very pop, very mainstream country. being given this entirely new breath of life, this entirely new vision for what it could become. 7 times over on each of the 7 tracks of this fairly small album, that promise was redeemed. Every track is huge, soulful, this living testament to the huge feelings and the power of RMR's voice. And what might seem like a gimmick, if you don't know, the gimmick kind of is that he has some hip-hop elements, and he's certainly dealing with a lot of subject matter that's quite common among hip-hop. But he's using kind of country melodies and country-style singing, and really blends the two genres in a way that is very hard to encapsulate. Like that kind of breakdown of, well, this part is like hip-hop and this part is like country keeps getting subverted time and time again. It really feels like a genre being born before our eyes, that he's found this Venn diagram, this inner circle of the emotions that are shared, the passion that is shared, the kind of perspective on society that is shared, and really shows the potential of it, that it can be so fruitful in so many different modes and styles. And simultaneously, the rebellious underdog heart of country is reborn aflame. Because my understanding is that most people who liked country from like my parents' generation now hate country, that what used to be a genre that was all about rebelling against the man and living as an outlaw and as an individual is now become extremely branded, extremely corporate, all about just kind of partying and getting drunk, and that most people find it kind of disgraceful, that it has like very boring pop melodies and stuff. And that's the sort of country that I was subjected to a lot in my youth, because I grew up way out in the middle of nowhere and a lot of my friends listened to it. It's just does nothing for me. In this, though, I really feel like the potential of old country is being born again. Most beautifully and symbolically, Young Thug, who long before Lil Nas X, long before Lil Tracy, long before we had any of this hip-hop country stuff, said yeehaw on Family Don't Matter. The first of this gigantic new wave of hip-hop country joins in on the remix of Rascal. That is just so beautiful to me. And he does a very touching verse too, one that is very out of character for him, but really shows how much he appreciates this legacy that has been built around his original yeehaw. God, Family Don't Matter though. What an amazing song. Of course, none of the significance would matter much if the songs weren't bangers. None of this innovation, none of this legacy. It's because the songs are so addictive. It's because they're so catchy, because they just hit, because every single song has just this moment of, oh, so good. His voice lends itself so well to so many melodies, so many rhythms. And there's almost so many moments that all I can describe it as like clutch, that you're just like, yes. Just little rhythmic things, little ways his voice just like punches in on a hook. I don't know. I was like addicted to this album. I'm very, very excited to see what comes next. He's released a couple like micro tracks on YouTube that have been sometimes very mind-blowing. The video with Amber Rose especially, where he kind of adopts the flow of Sometimes We Laugh, Sometimes We Cry by Drake. Just thinking about it now, I have like chills. So I'm really excited for the next album-length project. I think it could be a masterpiece. My recommended tracks are Welfare, which I think is the opening track. It just is like an absolute banger. Just the rhythm on the chorus is so compelling. It's just like pulling you out from whatever mood you'd been in before and making you just feel capable of anything. And then the Rascal remix featuring Young Thug. I think Rascal is still just the clearest statement of intent with like what he kind of wants to do with his music. And then the Young Thug voice verse in the middle that starts with the legendary "Fuck the police." Of course. What more can you say? All right. Moving right along to another mainstream hip-hop album. We have Ty Dolla $ign's featuring Ty Dolla $ign. This, I think, Ty is one of hip-hop's most underrated contributors. Think of all of the big songs he's been on, like big pop songs, and then also just all of the like really, really good like deep cuts from albums from more like serious rappers. He's been all over the place, and almost everything he touches turns to gold. And yet people still kind of like don't know who he is. I think he's not like in people's mind as this huge deal rapper compared to other like more famous people. But in terms of his contributions to like this kind of era of hip hop, it's hard to find many peers for him. The titular gimmick that this album is just covered in features that almost every track has like a bunch of other people on it, is really, really strong. He works excellently with collaborators across genres and moods, from Serpent with Feet to Thugger to Nicki to Kanye to FK Twigs to Skrillex. This is an exhausting list. Your mind is bounced around like a ping pong ball when you try to think of each of these artists' styles. But just his like smoky, ethereal, smooth voice comes out so strong in any of these contexts. It always creates the perfect foundation for these artists to express themselves in their most essential, almost self-parodious forms. Like the Big Sean verse on this, I just think is like quintessential Big Sean for better or worse. Nicki comes through with like just an absolute classic Nicki Minaj verse. Just everybody is their full self because he allows this space for them to go so hard. The beats are also perfectly situated, enthralling to delve into, but not overpowering. There's a couple beats on here that I was kind of flabbergasted by, but they never distract from just having an overall kind of cohesive sound that you're just immersed into the whole thing. And Ty really holds his own too. There's some solo tracks that are still fantastic, and he's often doing the hooks, which are just hyper catchy. And it really makes you appreciate, just by seeing him in all these different lights, what an amazing musician he really is. And I was really impressed with this, that the album as a whole has this very engrossing arc across of it. There's excellent contrast between like very simple radio-friendly bangers and then like transcendental bangers with these really nicely included little interludes. I don't know if this is just like a Spotify play count trick, but I've been noticing more and more artists are really leaning into the musical interlude of just having like a minute-long track here and there to only serve as like a bridging flow throughout the album. Yeah, really good stuff. And Ty, I think, is the one that really allows this development to take hold. It's a feeling of directorial excellence that he just knows how to connect all of these things with his voice as the constant. My cat has popped up on the table. I think he smells food, but there is only empty food container. And yeah, like I think something that sometimes is lacking in these mainstream hip hop albums is a feeling of an arc over the album. But here, Ty really makes it happen. My recommended tracks, first is very much like a mainstream radio-friendly banger called Double R. What, is there food in here? Oh, there's like a few crumbs in here. Sorry, kitty. You cannot eat even crumbs because your stomach might get upset. Double R featuring Lil Durk. I've become a really big Lil Durk fan lately. It just has the absolute catchiest hooks. Just everyone's flow is like engrossing, hypnotic. A very fun song that's literally just about a car. And Your Turn, which is from much later in the album, is one of these sort of transcendental bangers where it really gets into this kind of jam session feeling with all sorts of looped hooks and the message of it is kind of interesting too, that it's a message of everything being transient, nothing being permanent, that if you are lamenting something that you lost out on, well, that was never really yours. It was just your turn. It was just your turn to enjoy that lifestyle or whatever. I think that's cool. An interesting message from an album that often has more superficial themes. Here we have some half-naked girl on her bed. It is Charlie XCX's How I'm Feeling Now. As hyperpop becomes the genre of the next decade, that and of course rap country, we celebrate the boldest efforts yet of one of its patron saints. Charlie always being someone who is fairly high up in the mainstream, who has had huge pop singles, but is always pulling up alongside her much more experimental artists, these hyperpop labels, these hyperpop producers, to make something truly special that a lot of people can appreciate in a niche that's usually quite challenging, I guess I would say. The production is intense, messy, abrasive, loud, rhythmically and melodically disorienting, exquisite. There really is an exquisiteness, I think, in hyperpop when all of this stuff just like lines up in this most chaotic, messy way. That something even more sublime emerges from within it. Yes, and deep within it, perfectly catchy pop melodies crystallize and emerge. Lyrically, this is a very sincere and unfiltered expression of very primal feelings. Memories and fantasies swirl in her isolation from her past life, coalescing and idealizing. Just a lot of love songs, a lot of yearning, a lot of remembering, a lot of just the party that was in her mind that she can remember from the last time she could see her friends has now become this platonic ideal of all parties, and she's able to express both that and the gap between her and that. I might have had some more points about this. Well, yeah, because her work, I'd say, has always been somewhat hyper-real. It's never really been an attempt to be like, this is my actual life, but like really leaning into this idea that as a musician, you have like a persona, you're leaving this unreal life, you're selling like a fantasy. But now the gap between that expression and the simulacra of what her actual life has become is very, very highlighted. Because the now and how she's feeling now, of course, is a reflection on quarantine, on making this album alone, on not being able to tour it, on not being able to do promotion for the singles and stuff. And this is mixed with very compelling, very relatable confessions, some shockingly sincere and just direct confessions of insecurity, of depression, of loneliness. Things that she kind of summarizes and brings us into are things like discussions with her therapists, her inner monologue at these most extreme bad feelings. All of this is just nakedly spilled out with the same breath that she talks about how much she wants to meet up with people, that she wants to party again. The combination is rich and complex, a portrait of the innermost, yearningest slice of mind. My recommended tracks are Forever, one of the early tracks. It has some really kind of intense, noisy moments in production, but also just a very sincere and straightforward kind of song of yearning for love. And Detonate, which shows up a bit later in the album, equally complex, but with much more mixed feelings in the lyrics, and just kind of seeing the journey inward to her mind, I think is pretty cool. Okay. Next, we have more hyperpop. We can see this chaotic, gruesome extravaganza cover, but deep within it is, of course, that now iconic tree. We're looking at 100 gecs, 1,000 gecs, and the Tree of Clues. In the time since the first 1,000 gecs album came out, they've evolved from like weird music nerd meme, which is when I found out about them, to like a mainstream meme where everyone was making jokes about, hey, little piss baby and stuff, to now just like a full-on cultural phenomenon that no one is even pretending there's like an ironic layer in listening to them anymore. They're just like seen as what they are, as these kind of prophets of a new wave of music. People just genuinely appreciating the complexity and subtleties and genius of their music, and putting together one hell of a remix album as this appreciation grows and spreads. The impact of that album might be impossible to overstate. They really opened so many different doors by making music like that and standing behind it so unwaveringly. This collection of remakes highlights one of the most beautiful things about the original, that everyone took something different from it. That's what I mean, that it opened so many doors, that everyone listened to this and it triggered something special and unique in each of them. Artists from all over the aesthetic, genre, era, scene, map each expose and elevate what they loved about the original. The compositional complexity or the charming simplicity, the depth and the breadth of sampling, the giddy pop catchiness or the unapproachable slurry of abrasive microgenres, the raw and relatable stories or the nonsensical jokes or the lines that are somehow both. I might go and throw my phone into the lake, yeah. Is that a joke? Or is that just something that you really feel like doing sometimes? The nostalgia, remembered or inherited from moments evolved to transcend the cool, not cool dichotomy. So many genres that have just kind of become parodies of themselves, that have become like laughing stocks, that have become memes, brought back with full sincerity, saying, no, at one point you did listen to Linkin Park. You cannot hide from that. And what's more, the part of you that loved it, the part of you that understood what was just so unique and cool about it, is still in you. And even if you're too young for that, even if y'all thinking of me like a boomer because I listened to Hybrid Theory when I was like 12 or something, you still can understand, like, that potential still lurks within you too, to appreciate Fall Out Boy for the first time here and now. And more than any specific idea on this album, I think it's that omni-welcoming attitude that everyone is accepted, everyone is cool, everything that you once thought was cool can be cool again, in some combination, in some recontextualization, in some embedation, in other genres, in other combinations. It's all good. It's really, really beautiful to me. I think this is an amazing attitude to have when making music. My recommended tracks are the Hand Crushed by a Mallet remix that has Fall Out Boy along with some other early 2000s legends. It's just the sound of, like, I don't know how to describe this. I listen to 100 Gex a lot. I listen to Hand Crushed by a Mallet a lot. Those opening lines, I've been trying to find a way to kill time, became very iconic to me in a way that it felt like it connected back to myself in the early 2000s. I didn't even listen to Fall Out Boy in the early 2000s, and yet the first time I heard like the leak of this track, a little snippet had leaked, and I could hear the Fall Out Boy vocalist, whose name I don't even know, singing those lines. My mind was just blown by like how correct it felt. So much so that it felt for an instant like, oh, the 100 Gex version was like a cover. And then, kind of completely different, the Gek to You remix with Dorian Electra taking someone else at the forefront of hyperpop, another fantastic musician that they've just been putting out really amazing records and albums and stuff too. Just like a really cool collaboration where you can tell how much they appreciate one another. And it has one of my favorite moments on the whole album where they have like a sample of it going, Dorian a Gektra. And it's just like such a stupid joke to call them Dorian a Gektra. But like, I don't know, something about it really hits. Okay. We're gonna move on to number 5, the Spooky Spectrogram Portraits, which is We Will Always Love You by the Avalanches. They first became famous for their plunderphonic approach. The first album by the Avalanches, which everyone should listen to because it's fantastic, Since I Left You. Wait. Yeah, that's what it's called, right? Oh my gosh, I have to look it up. As soon as I said it, it didn't sound right. But I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Yeah, Since I Left You. Yeah. If you should listen to that. It's really, really good. And it's entirely made up of samples. It's kind of like a found footage collage, but in music. And that the gimmick of that made them really infamous, and the fact that the album was phenomenal made them really beloved. And now, after years of absence, they've gone the exact opposite way. Now I'm pretty sure everything on this album is, well, maybe not absolutely everything, but it's very, very low on samples. And there's much less of a sense of like deliberate highlighting of samples, highlighting of like having plucked something from something else, plundered it from something else and put it together. Now it's much more about like highlighting guest stars, contributing original music, about having like a huge diversity of genres, but all of that kind of coming from the same sound, from the same collective intelligence. I don't know how I refer to it as collective intelligence. An amazing transformation for this band, and one that is really paying off for them. Some is definitely they're less memey. They're least memey yet. There's no really bizarre moments. There's nothing that feels like very tongue-in-cheek. And there's nothing like a plot that I'd say their first 2 albums had, where you can kind of follow. Since I Left You is kind of about going on vacation in very broad strokes. And Wildflower is kind of about listening to the radio throughout the day. This one has no, it's just kind of tracks. There's no real weird aspect of it. And that was kind of disappointing at first. That when I listened to it, I found it a little unmemorable. Nothing really stood out to me. There was nothing that after I finished, I was like, haha, I remember when they had the cereal ad. But then I realized, even though it was not that memorable, even though I couldn't point to what was drawing me back to it, I kept coming back. Specifically, this album is about the same length as doing one run in Slay the Spire. Or at least as long as it takes me to do one run in Slay the Spire. And I just would listen to it and play Slay the Spire like day after day after day. And I found myself just really starting to enjoy it. It's so beautiful when you allow yourself to really soak into it. These small recurring motifs and hints build up this really great cross-album sense of anticipation. The really kind of big bangers they like hint at in earlier tracks. It's like a Beach Boys sort of maneuver. They just start throwing in little melodic hints and stuff. And so that when you're really attuned to it, when you've heard it quite a few times, the giddiness you get knowing that it's coming. Ooh, it's so nice. There's these long, dreamy ambient passages that gently lift you into the perfect emotional state. And then things explode into these really wonderful, very catchy, very uplifting choruses on those aforementioned big banger tracks. The messages on this album, of course, are what you would expect from something called We Will Always Love You. Love, understanding, achievement, fulfillment. It's exactly what we need these days. I have no qualms with an album that just makes me feel good about being myself and about striving forward and giving me some vague hope that things might get better. My recommended tracks are two of the kind of big banger ones that I think kind of serve as these centerpieces and anchors for the album. Wherever You Go, which has all these really awesome kind of melodic and rhythmic change-ups, and just, I don't know, just like a really cool groove. And Take Care in Your Dreaming, which has just some really insane rap verses, really inspirational stuff if you read the lyrics, just all about striving and overcoming and stuff. Yeah, lovely, lovely album. Next we have Fiona Apple's Fetch the Bolt Cutters. This is the masterpiece core. Literally, it got a 10 from Pitchfork. Insta-canon classic. The one that is going to appear on far more lists at number one than any other position, than any other album. The one where I feel more like I have to justify where it's only number 4 than why I would put it on the list at all. And I mean, that's kind of a silly thing to do. I just like the next 3 albums even more. What can I say? But it is very good. It is very good. There's this fiery, dramatic arc that motivates the album. And each individual song, too, also feels like this burning revelation that she just bursts through and conquers on each and every track. It's usually a mode of deconstructing and then transforming your feelings. That the song or the part of the album or the album as a whole kind of starts with her feelings perhaps muddled, perhaps self-doubting, and then breaking it down, using music to kind of examine each emotion in isolation to connect each memory, each association you have, and then rebuilding in a transformed way your perspective on it. Shifting trauma to power is generally the arc we see here. Discomfort, this initial feeling of I don't like it, is broken down into rumination, to why don't I like it? What is this bringing up for me? What does this remind me of? And then exploding in the self-affirmation of no, fuck you. It's your fault. You're the worst. I'm the best. Here's what I'm going to do about it. The recollection of tracing a shining path of inspiration into a beautiful future, that you can see your potential. You look to the past and see how all along you are still fighting. You are still overcoming. You are getting up and moving that into what potential you have in the future, which is huge. Laying moral foundations, which build up into action. I was very impressed with the ways that she universalized the situations she sings about, which are my understanding, very, very personal. It's kind of a confessional album in a lot of ways. Or a twit longer album, if you will. But that they're very nicely universalized into many different contexts, many different situations. The results are rousing bangers and somber explorations that meet you where you are. That even if you're fortunate enough to not go through the exact trauma that she sings about, that you can place this within your own life. And at the heart, this is kind of what I'm alluding to, there's a very tragic tale of struggling to stop a serial abuser who has abused you, and now you can see is moving on to abuse again. And yet, there's a sense of playfulness. There's a sense of triumph. There's a very strong sense of self-assurance in a way that still carries the weight of those tragedies. Not that she is able to dismiss them, not that she is able to ignore them, but that she carries that weight and says, despite that, I am still strong. I can still delight. I can still sing. So yeah, I didn't really talk about the music all that much because I think the music is just like really damn good. It's just like extremely solid. But it is the message of the album. It's the character portrait that builds up around herself that really makes it so special. The recommended tracks, the opener, I Want You to Love Me, is just heartbreakingly sincere, especially in the context of the rest of the album, but an absolute banger that hits. And Newspaper, much later on, once you're kind of more immersed in the plot, it really, again, shows just her talent, though, of these songs that build up in a massive fireball. Okay. Now we have this lovely Treeline and some text that I personally cannot read a syllable of. It is Jay Electronica's A Written Testimony, one of those legendary albums that you never expect to actually hear. If you don't know the story, Jay Electronica has been signed to Jay-Z's album, or Jay-Z's record label Rockefeller for like 20 years and has put out like 2 mixtapes like 15 years ago and then just did nothing. And there was always rumors, the new Jay Electronica project is coming out soon. Maybe there'll be like 1 single. He dropped Control, which became like a very famous song because Kendrick did that insane verse on it. And everyone forgets that it's actually a Jay Electronica song, that he has a verse afterwards. The one that where Kendrick calls out a whole bunch of specific people and everyone was like, but yeah, this album, which was always called A Written Testimony and always kind of referred to as this trilogy ender for him, just never ever materialized until now. And often I feel like when these legendary albums keep getting discussed and keep getting delayed, I kind of get afraid to hear it. I don't really want to. I just know it's not going to live up to that reputation. But this time was the exception. This time I think it fully delivered on what people had been hoping for the last decade plus. It feels like a whole new cinematic language in hip-hop. One that is Kanye tier in its richness, in its... I always talk about the cinematics of Kanye, that Kanye feels like he's directing a movie where most other producers are directing like a TV show, if that makes sense. That there's much more focus on immersion of really understanding like how people interpret a scene within a sequence, stuff like that. And this feels just as rich as that without being just a Kanye imitator. Carving an entirely new path from just as early on, like an entirely new branch in the tree of life, way down as early as Kanye. Deeply interwoven in genre cultural histories, but through hitherto unseen pathways. That it really feels like classic hip-hop, and yet fresh. Carefully balanced moments of celebration and memorializing give Jay a compelling and original portrait, his unique status in hip-hop highlighted without gimmickiness. He talks on this album quite a bit about how difficult it is to make this album, how people's expectations for him are so high, how weird it is that he's signed to this legendary label and hasn't really put out anything. And it doesn't feel gimmicky. It doesn't feel like he's, kind of nudging us and winking us and being like, wow, isn't this crazy that you're listening to this? it just feels like a very natural thing for him to include as part of this self-portrait. As along with the feeling of triumph that, yeah, I actually did record an album now. I've done it, and it's great. And then a feeling of memorializing of I've been living my whole life this whole time, and many sad things have happened to me, and all of those things I carry with me too. And yeah, just this feeling of fresh yet classic, that it seems like it should be something that had been had. I'm like trying to create a new grammatical tense here. Had been building on. It feels like hip hop should have had been building on this for like 15 years. And yet it was just this little time capsule that only popped up now. Jay's struggle to achieve this project that looms over him manifests brilliantly. We kind of already talked about this, just that he doesn't shy away from the subject matter of, hey man, where the hell is the album? But does so in a way that's like very endearing and very relatable, very compelling. We hear this feeling of work in progressness within the final album. We feel his ambitions reaching even further. That this was, you know, like it's a good album, but it's not like you would think, oh, after 15 years, suddenly now it's good enough. It's much more like, okay, now I am going to release the struggle. Now this is a story of the struggle of reaching towards what I think is that I'm going to release it right away, perfect album. And you can hear glimpses of him reaching further. That you can hear glimpses of him like wanting to spend another 20 years on it, you know? Ultimately, in our hearing it, the miracle is proven. He did it, and it's excellent. I really love projects that you can kind of view on that sort of meta level, where it's all about the artist struggling to express themselves, to overcome things that were holding them back, and to know that by listening to it, they succeeded. Even if the story of them succeeding isn't within the project, you know on this meta level that it worked in the end, and it's really beautiful. The whole thing just has this really wonderful warm feeling. You really feel like connected to him. You really feel like, not that I was like a super big J electronic occultist, that I was the type to check every rumors page, every leak to see if he was really working on it or anything. But I felt really caught up in what it must be like to be that kind of fan, just in how this project finally materialized. And I mean, his rapping is just fantastic. He doesn't rap like anyone else, but it's so powerful. And in a bonus treat, this is not something I expected from this album. So much Jay-Z. Jay-Z is on almost every track, but you don't know it looking at the track list because he's never featured. He's just there. And he's never rapping about being Jay-Z. Like, maybe there's a few references to his wealth. That goes without saying. But it's not like, wow, it's Jay-Z. It's just that he wants to be here as a rapper, as a friend to Jay Electronica, rapping as if he was just a nobody again. And he really puts in work, and it's just fantastic to hear Jay-Z like flow with that much effort again, instead of just being like, sup, I'm Jay-Z, I'm on this track. I got paid like $500,000 for this. Alright, that's the end of my verse. Not that Jay-Z's like lazy, he's actually one of the better rappers in that like tier, but you can tell when they've been brought on as a name versus here where he's literally, his name has been left off and he just wants to rap. Okay, my recommended tracks are Shiny Suit Theory, which I think really exemplifies this fresh yet classicness. It has these samples. You'll probably recognize them if you hear this track, but there's samples of kids going like, wow, and yay, and I really, really like them. I don't understand where they came from originally. Lots of things like sample them. I think like Roller Coaster Tycoon samples them, and like Radiohead's 15 Step are two examples that are like lodged in my brain. But it just kind of feels like he's doing it as if that was like a common thing to do in hip hop. But it's not. It's like this alternate timeline common thing. But it really, really hits. I don't know why. It just, every time it happens, I'm just like, yeah. It's like that clutch moment. And then Ezekiel's Wheel, a very late cut from the album that just is a lot more somber, a lot more kind of melancholy and reflecting. And it has a lot of him reflecting on the difficulties he's had coming this far as an artist. It also has a really, really amazing line where he kind of like gives up on actually recording a line. And you'll hear rappers a lot in like demo tracks and in leaked early versions that they come up with the flow before the lyrics, and that when they haven't figured out the lyrics for a part, they're just kind of going and he kept in one line like that, and he makes some comment about how like at some point you just kind of got to run with it. It's I don't know, something about that. I was just like, wow, that's cool. Okay. Moving on. Our album number 2. This also has kind of a reflection motif. The Microphones, with Microphones in 2020. So the Microphones, since 2003, this guy Phil Elveum has now been recording as Mount Erie. But for the first time in 17 years, he goes back to his original moniker, The Microphones. It is just one 44-minute long track. He is still very much in the wake of his wife's untimely passing. She died of cancer just in her early 30s when they just had this very young daughter together. I knew as soon as I heard about this album I was going to cry. And indeed, it was big criers. Very minimal editing, very minimal additions on top of just his churning, beautiful acoustic guitar. It draws us into this long and deep exploration of memory and loss. Stories are dotted through time. He'll just kind of start telling this little anecdote without really explaining why. There's just images, standalone, things he can remember feeling. No names, no places, a highlighting of very small things. It's Noscardesque in its vivid fractal structure, and I don't think this is a coincidence. Phil Elveum, in an interview I read, was talking about how he was reading Noscard's Mein Kampf, and how he really like enjoyed this kind of like rambling fractal storytelling where you start telling one story, and if that reminds you of something, you just plunge into that next story, and if that reminds you of something, you just plunge into that next story, with no concern whatsoever of how far away you've gotten from the original point. And also, like Noscard, it examines this idea of like pointillism sensations which constitute the picture we see of our lives. That if we reflect on what makes us us, if we reflect on what is important to us, on the narrative of our life, it's very rarely like some singular compelling story. It's very rarely like something direct you can point to. Instead, it is just a myriad number of sensations, each one of them just a tiny little light into the interior of our mind that in the end can provide this very rich tapestry that is our identity. A major focus is on his artistic career. He reflects on notable album releases, on notable tours, on kind of breakthroughs he had, and how he wanted to express himself and record music. And there was this deep connectedness I felt when the moments and the lines from his songs that he like quotes, that he points out, lined up with those that I also felt most compelling, most resonant, which isn't a shocker because I'm sure a lot of people also found those moments very compelling. They're often more of the famous moments in his career, but it still felt very personal and very intimate, this very direct connection that I had with him, especially because those moments when they were compelling and resonant were at times where I was like crying a lot, times where I felt extremely just emotionally devastated and stuff. I can't overstate how special some of these albums in his earlier career are to me. That they are the albums I go to when I feel shittiest. They are the albums I go to when I want to have a big cry. I shouldn't get into it. Okay, one example I can think of is there was a time where my friend died. An internet friend of mine that had been very dear to me, someone that I talked to pretty much every day online. I found out that he died. And I just went walking with no direction whatsoever. I was way out in the country at the time, and it started pouring rain and I was listening to the microphones, and it just felt right. It just felt like... So that's the sort of situation that is being recalled in my mind when I listen to this stuff, and hearing him ruminate on it and talk about how he was able to bring that out and how he was feeling at the time. It's really amazing. The language of sadness he has instilled in me over the last 15 years has been re-evoked. Yeah. Yeah. I really, yeah. That was one example. Many such cases. Many such cases of listening to Philadelphia music and crying a lot. No recommended tracks, obviously, because it's just one very long track. We have one more album to talk about, which is Modus Vivendi by 070 Shake. This is the first full-length project after her very excellent guest features on some Kanye albums and some albums by other people in her collective, and then the Glitter EP that came out a few years ago that I absolutely fell in love with and still listen to quite frequently today. My expectations were very high after all of that. Probably unreasonably high, given just how much those previous songs like connected with me in particular, that they kind of tapped into some weird musical spot in my brain that I really couldn't reasonably expect someone to kind of keep hitting that one weird spot, but they still were exceeded. This was even better than I could have hoped. The first full length is always very nerve-wracking because you can't really just extend out your EPs or extend out your singles. It becomes tiresome to make that a full-length project. You have to work in a lot of different other modes. You have to kind of think more about the arc of the album. You have to have some sense of relief and tension and variety for variety's sake. But she just nailed everything. Everything she went into, new structures, new emotional spaces, the idea of having an arc over the album, everything was just done to an absurd standard of excellence. The production levels up yet again. It becomes both more more professional sounding, more deep, more rich, but also more her, that it feels more like everything is emanating from her voice, from her mood, from her stories. And that's quite the feat. Usually you have to kind of choose. But she managed to have her cake, the cake of kind of mainstream accepted good production, and also to eat it and indulge and really expressing her innermost self in a way that was unprecedented. There's a crazy range of musical styles on this album, from all the way back to like early Tyler the Creator OF beats to really like glittering radiant synths that remind me more of like FKA Twigs, and a lot of like live recorded instrumentals that are just very precisely mastered, that they don't kind of make themselves overstated, but just the way that like the piano can come in, or like a guitar can come in, and it has that like perfect iconic rock feel amid all of this noise, amid all of this synth. Stuff like that really hits for me. All of this were peppered with really cool breakdowns, sometimes a very haunting minimal piano or a big abrasive burst. Everything was on the table and everything was executed masterfully. She can confidently move into like any mood, any aesthetic, any genre. I just cannot overstate the feeling of crazy potential I get from 070 Shake. All of this, of course, is anchored and elevated by her vocal performance, which is really unmatchable. Nobody sings like her. And I think that could be like her greatest weakness if she wants to succeed in the mainstream, because her vocal style is very unique. There's this unflinchingness to it, honest, open, this raw expression of anxiety and desire that she really, it's like you wouldn't know that she was popular at all. There's a line on Glitter where she goes, ask before my tour, before I really exist. And she has this very huge self-awareness of the fact that she's getting more popular, that she's getting shows, she's getting tours, she's getting recognized. And yet There's no pretension whatsoever. There's no sense of performance. There's no sense of putting on a persona. It's as if she still is just in her bedroom with her friends, recording tracks that they feel like won't extend past their little collective. Her voice, though, man. In the first second, this is the first time I ever listened to her, was on the Kanye album Yay, which I have mixed feelings about. It's not his best or anything. But I had heard a lot of hype for the song Ghost Town when I was first kind of like reading about the album and stuff. And as soon as her voice came in, I was like, okay, this is something really special. When she goes, oh, once again I am a child, and she really sounds like a kid. Like, she really sounds like she's tapping into this inner childness. That it's just this weird sense of rawness. It's this liminal space where she sounds like really amateurish in some ways. That you can tell, like, she's not a formal singer. She's not gone to like choir school or anything like that. And yet it's so mastered. It still sounds like someone who sings every day that just delights in expressing her voice. It's endearing, but like definitive. Like you think it's just you're just like, you really want to cheer for her, and yet you feel like she's 1,000 miles past needing you to cheer for her. I really cannot praise the sound of her voice enough. I love Solange. I love Frank Ocean. I love Sampha. I love these people that have just hypnotically lush, smooth voices. But this is something completely different, and it compels me. I can't wait to hear more. Okay. My recommended tracks are Divorce, which has some really cool like rhythmic stuff. It has like an awesome sense of like, I don't know, just kind of flowing along, and then this really haunting, really awesome piano breakdown at the end. And then Terminal B, which shows up near the end of the album, when things kind of feel like they're fraying apart in a really interesting way. So the track is kind of all over the place, and it has some kind of strange, compelling samples to it and some noisiness. Really, really good stuff. Okay. That is my number one album of the year. A lot of really strong contenders. By the way, I'm doing all of this in Microsoft Edge because for some reason, here, I'll show you. I think I can show you pretty quickly. When I open up any slideshow in Google Drive on Chrome, all of the text is stacked on top of itself. Every word and every line just shows up all at once. Isn't that stupid? What kind of dumbass error is that? So I've been trying to fix it, and then I was like, all right, maybe Microsoft has the solution, and it works. Anyways, a really good year for music. A lot of releases that I also really enjoyed, but I just like didn't have the time to acclimatize myself to enough, I think. So definitely going to be going back to 2020 and digging deeper. And 2021, off to a very strong start. A lot of albums I'm looking forward to talking about to you in a year, or hopefully less than a year, because hopefully it won't be so late next year. Bye!